And we welcome everyone to Phoenixville Public Library. I'm Mark Pinto, Adult Services Director here, and tonight we continue our support of local authors with Sloane Ellis, who has written Used, Not a Memoir, chronicling his battle with addiction and other important events, major events in his life. We are proud to have him with us tonight, so please, everybody, welcome Sloane Ellis. All right.
Thank you, everyone. I'll begin tonight with just a reading from the introductory chapter. Life is a grindstone. Whether it grinds you down or polishes you up depends on the stuff you're made of. John Billings. Anachronist. Summer 2010. I am traversing the passenger door of a rapidly accelerating entry-level BMW, Audi, Benz, or some other douchebag wannabe wagon with tan guts. My only tether to life is the bloody pop collar of a man I do not know. Just over 9 years ago, I entered my first rehabilitation center for drug addiction, not knowing at the time the soul-searching and soul-crushing journey I was beginning. Right now, what I do know is that my bare feet have lost pace with the car as it swerves back and forth, and now drag on the freshly paved macadam. 5 years ago, I watched my father choke to death on his own blood, a tragic end to a life blighted by alcoholism. 5 years from now, I would add another stamp to my rehab passport, exploring the hope and horror of a 28-day inpatient booking, wondering how I possibly could have gotten this bad. Just 12 hours ago, I was smiling at how good my life was, drinking my first beer of the day, poured from the tap tower installed in my very own home bar. It was my pride enjoying the last thing an alcoholic and drug addict should have at his disposal. 12 hours from now, I am lying to my wife about why the top of my foot is missing. Turns out, when apparent death is imminent, it's not just the greatest hits of your life shuffling through the writhing neurons in your brain, but also things that haven't happened yet. My sudden powers of prophecy are less divination and more self-fulfillment. Confused yet? It gets worse. Hello, I'm an alcoholic, drug addict, narcissist, self-centered egoist, pathological liar, criminal, occasional nihilist with borderline histrionic personality disorder, just a dusting of sociopathy and psychopathy. But the only real problem I ever had was a person called Sloane. That is me. Now, if you've ever been to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, you may recognize this riff on the standard introduction of oneself before speaking, where you say who you are, followed by your problem. So who am I? Just an average man, average height, average intelligence, average, well, you know. I'm not a Hollywood hunk or sports legend or platinum YouTube darling. Never considered myself a pioneer. But I was responsible for the restructuring of the illegal drug and impaired practitioner policy at 3 different medical institutions. Perhaps the greatest things I have done are all the things I have done wrong. I am no one special. I used to think I was, and that was the root of all my problems. You could walk by me on the street and never notice me. I could be anyone, because wherever I was, I tried to blend in, searching out my memes and masks for the appropriate occasion. Or I could be no one, retreating from the harsh light of the reels I have for most of my life. Or I could be the guy who saves your life. When I was old enough to be an altar boy, lectured to by grown men in robes on the sins of the secular, it was one of the few secular teachers in the Catholic elementary school where I attended once told me that I had a talent as a writer. And this came at a very seminal time in my life, because even at the age of 13, a lot of my classmates and friends, had pretty solid ideas what they wanted to do with their lives. Some wanted to follow in the footsteps of their fathers as craftsmen. One wanted to be a doctor, one a lawyer. Some just wanted to work at their favorite arcade or restaurant. All more practical ideas than mine, which was becoming an astronaut. But that was really the only thing that I had an interest in at that age. I can remember vividly watching the space shuttle launches, in the middle of class, and that was me, always my head in the clouds. But other than that, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, and there was always this pressure to move out and move on, to do something better. We certainly changed directions as plumbers and electricians are the new millionaires. My own son wants to follow that path, and I support him wholeheartedly. But back then, as good teachers do, Mrs. Mahon gave me a purpose. Inspired by all those great 80s horror movies that I wasn't supposed to watch, but did anyway, I wrote my own spooky story for a Halloween-themed English class writing assignment. Full of plenty of scares and gore, and I remember thinking that, writing something like this in a Catholic school, so divergent, from all of our biblical teachings, might get me expelled. But I did it anyway, and I had a blast doing it. So the day we got our graded papers back, I was a bit nervous that I would get a poor grade at the very least. At the very worst, I'd burn in hell for eternity. But Mrs. Mahon walked by my desk, dropped the paper down with an A+ on it, and said, "You have a talent for writing, my friend." Called me her friend. So I said, "Okay, but that's what I can do. I can be a writer." Yeah, and I remember feeling this weight lifted. And it was just the kind of thing where, with all this pressure to kind of do the right thing, I felt like I had somewhere to go. And loved books, always read. And I would dabble, I would write things down, my own forms of poetry, short stories. But nothing ever really stuck with. I was too busy kind of hanging out with friends, trying to attract girls. So didn't really become my path forward, not too much later. But there was always this, especially when I got into high school, that dreaded summer reading list. I always looked forward to the books, the book reports, discovering classics like Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle or Shelley's Frankenstein, Orwell's 1984, or anything by Edgar Allan Poe. When I got into college, it was Whitman, it was Hemingway, it was Plath. I was so enamored by these authors' master language. How they string together this perfect union of simple words that just gave me goosebumps. And I wanted that. I wanted to create that. I wanted to create that liminal space, that world where anything was possible, limited only by what I could dream. But things get in the way. In fact, shortly after that seminal moment with Ms. Mahon, later on that year, became introduced to what alcoholism is. My father was an alcoholic. At the age of 13, these wasn't a very common term thrown around. I was raised in a big Irish Catholic family. Alcohol was a staple at all gatherings. If somebody was drinking too much, they were just having a hard time. Words like alcoholism, rehab, were not commonplace. Certainly weren't thrown around in my family. So rather than kind of focusing on my path forward and figuring out what it would be like to start writing and kind of have that as my future, I enlisted the help of my best friend to go on a journey to find my father. Chris and I had been friends since the original Kenner Star Wars figures were sold in toy stores. In the 80s, music was the only music. He's one of those people in your life where years would pass without contact, yet when you reunite, it was like no time had passed. He was my friend and brother in arms in my war with life, so mere weeks before we could trade in our Catholic school and clip-on tie and slacks for the classy Kmart clip-on tie and jacket of high school. When I asked him to help me find my missing daddy, without a word, he grabbed his Walkman, a handful of tapes, and off we went. We rolled through the entire A side of Metallica's legendary Master of Puppets during our journey. Chris got the seminal Battery. I got the title track, of which the lyrical theme, ironically, is a thrashing parable about addiction. I hope the thrash band's thrumming metal anthems in my ears would drown out the roaring in my head. Gone was the Amblin-esque wonder of our journeys. This felt like a forgotten coming-of-age Stephen King novella, maybe ghost-written as Bachman. As part of an anthology, sandwiched between other literary bangers, optionless films. We were just two boys, trying to be men, trying to be heroes. Chris got the years back for the heavy shamble of the thing that should not be. What would I do when I found my dad? Would he realize the error of his ways? Would my pleading presence remind him his family was worth more than his drink? Would he push his glass aside and walk out beside me? Or would I drag him out by the arm? So like I said, life kind of hit me full force pretty early on. Growing up, there wasn't a lot of room for the things that we wanted to do. We weren't so much taught to dream, we were taught to get out. That was really my mom's way of kind of dealing with things. I was the oldest of four. We started to adapt these roles, the roles as the adult children of alcoholics, right? Where later on, I'm supposed to be this hero, being the oldest. And I failed at that. I wanted to try and find my father that day, and I couldn't get him out. That really was the beginning of this big shame hole that I started to dig for myself. Not because my mom said you did a bad thing and you couldn't get your dad back. This was something I put all on myself. But it was something I continued to spiral down, throughout my life. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that hole was filled by other things rather than the things they should have been. But I would continue to write. I would dabble, write some short stories, trying to find that magnum opus, that perfect union of thoughts and wordcraft and imagination, immortalized in a book or a film. A film is my other great love. My friends always wanted to be Luke Skywalker or Indiana Jones or the Terminator. I wanted to be the guy behind the camera, behind the pen. I wanted to be the reason they were there, the master of worlds. But I'm very good at starting things, not so proficient at finishing them. As an undergraduate, I initially majored in journalism, but realized that I didn't want to chase the story. I wanted to write the story, to create it. Took a screenwriting course and loved that, but talked myself out of a life grinding in LA until I found my big break. Or maybe I didn't want to work that hard to achieve my dream. That was another theme in my life, taking the easier, softer way. So I eventually majored in nursing. Not necessarily easy, but it was a decent, guaranteed income. Not something that really filled my soul. But I continued to pick writing back up and then put it back down again. And after entering a screenplay, I wrote into a contest run by none other than Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It was called Project Greenlight. It was all the rage back in the late 90s. I think they ran it a few times, and a couple good movies came out of it. But my screenplay barely got past the preliminary stages, and I said, well, that's it. I tried it. Maybe this isn't for me. And if I never really stick with it anyway, that's really what I should be doing. Was I lazy or uninspired? Truth is, I was afraid to fail. You put all your eggs into this one basket, this one dream that someone said you should have, and then you fail that, and then what's left? Maybe I just didn't want to put in the work. And it was later on that year hard to pin down the actual date, but sometime in the winter of 1998, I took my first Percocet. It was not because it was medically necessary, nor was it even because I had a prescription. I acquired it from the hospital in which I worked as a registered nurse. Never mind the fact that that powder blue amalgam of 5 milligram oxycodone and 325 milligrams of acetaminophen would not be missed. I was supposed to toss it in the sink of the midroom, as per protocol for routine medication waste. Never mind the fact that I betrayed the trust and endangered the license of the nurse that co-signed the waste, but could not stick around to watch me drop the pill in the drain because, as nurses do, she had to attend to 10 things at once. And never mind the fact that this was years before we decided dropping poison in our water supply was a bad idea. Well, I went green before it was cool to do so. I did my part for the environment by pocketing that pill. I did not take it that day, or even the next. I like to say it was maybe a week later when, after a particularly tough night, I just wanted to sleep soundly. Except that I did not sleep. I felt a delicious euphoria, a warm oblivion that I would chase for the next 20 years, dragging along those who cared for me the most. And after that, things were never really the same. I opened a door I could never really close. I flipped a switch I could never turn off again. Even standing here today, I do have long-term sobriety, and I have my life back. I know, and it took me a long time to learn this, but I know that beyond the shadow of a doubt, one wrong choice could have that toppling down on me all again. I had a counselor in one of my rehabs. I attended. He told me when he learned about my dream of wanting to become a writer, he asked me, he said, pie in the sky in a vacuum, what could you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I said, what I always wanted to do, I wanted to be a writer. Looked me dead in the face and said, you better write. Went on to say that creatives have this thing inside them, this force. It wants out, it needs to be expressed. Whether it's writing or singing or dancing or drawing or scrapbooking, it needs to get out. You know, like a hole, and when it's not, when it's chained in there, when it's bottled up, it starts to dig its own hole, this hole in the soul. You know, this thing I've been feeling for most of my life, that we often fill with things that we should. And in a lot of ways, you know, being a medical professional, I certainly like to assess things by how they pertain to our physiology. In the book, and in my own philosophy, I believe that addiction is a disease. Disease of some sort, whether it's mental or physical, or spiritual, or social even. I feel like we're all addicted to something, but I feel like it's a symptom usually of something greater. That there's something else there that addiction fills. And I can recall very vividly for me that addiction was something that kind of helped me through this shame hole that I had been digging for myself. I was always an athlete growing up. I was a swimmer, I was a rower. When I was in college, I was on a college rowing team and loved it. Loved being a part of that team, that hive mind of competition, that brotherhood. Then you graduate, and I think all the things that were probably keeping this latent addiction at bay finally took hold. It was when I was no longer part of a team, no longer sharing that communal hive, achieving something greater, that addiction saw an opportunity. That's what addiction is, an opportunistic infection. In medicine, an opportunistic infection is a sickness that affects those whose immune systems are already compromised. Most healthy people can withstand the daily onslaught of bacteria and viruses encountered in life, like a bouncer folding his massive arms in front of a bunch of dudes rolling up to the club without chicks in tow. But for those who are already sick, battling physical or mental stress, or those who just chip away at their body's bouncers, subsisting on fast food, no sleep, and no purpose, these previously innocuous invaders grow fangs, potentially causing serious illness. Addiction is no different. It's a virus that preys on the weak, the spiritually unfit. A twisted Ellis Island, addiction takes your poor, your tired, and your wretched masses and drowns them just offshore. I arrived on its shores a creative mank, offering discontent, insecurity, and ignorance. The beast inside me stirred, waking after a long dormancy. I used to think that first pill, that early opiate, was the root of all my ruin. Now I know it was the catalyst, waking something that was always there. Opened a door that I could never close and let it in. And so that became a common theme for me throughout life. And I achieved a lot, obviously became a nurse, got my master's, became a nurse anesthetist, and I realized that, I was good at it, especially caring for a sick father. As time went on, he just got worse and worse. He kind of lost his mind from dementia and wet brain. And he eventually died. And that was one of the saddest things I've ever encountered. And I hadn't really talked with him in many years at that point. I was married, raising a family. I had my own things to deal with, to attend to. But the day he died, and ever since, there was a moment which I'm going to read to you. It's a very important one. It's really what kind of set this whole thing in motion, really. And after that, we just never were the same again. Never had the same relationship. He was not my father, and I felt like that was something that I suffered from. It hit me hard. I felt like throughout life, it was hard for another father figure to enter it. I never really got a chance to say goodbye to my father, so I wasn't saying hello to someone else. The man I never knew I would need so much. And the day he died, I just broke down. Just sobbing, tears, just immediately. I had been pent up in there for 10 years or more. as much as I hated him for doing what he did to himself, I loved him, and I needed him. And I felt like there were these moments in my life, we talk about the introductory chapter, where I'm kind of going back and forth, and I play with time a lot in the book, because for me time, and maybe this is how it works for others too, but I feel like it's very rare you'll see me mention a date or a time or a certain period. It's all about, when I look back on my life, it's about how I was feeling during that time. Was I sober? Was I not sober? Was I in a good place? Or was I ruining things again? In recovery literature, we call that the 2 days you never would think about. Yesterday and tomorrow, right? The past and the future. The future we can't do anything about. The past we can't change. But we're so stuck in those two periods. And it's kind of what keeps us right where, instead of being where we are today, taking things one day at a time, which is why that aphorism exists, which I always hated. Because I was always fast forwarding to the next. I was always drowning in regret from the past. And that's what rehab does for you. It's like a casino, there's no clocks. They keep you right where you're supposed to be in the present, healing yourself. And it was this time I started to write at a pretty good clip. I had a sponsor that made me a journal every single day for a year. And I started writing things down, just still waiting for that voice, that inner voice to tell me what to do, where to go. And it wasn't until, I call it the big fall. It was probably the worst relapse I had back about 6 years ago. And that was it, that was everything. And I lost my family, I lost my marriage at the time. I lost my career, my third in healthcare. And all that was left was me. They say in recovery there's only 3 outcomes for an active alcoholic or drug addict. That's jails, institutions, or death. At that point I'd been through 3 rehabs, so there's your institutions. Didn't go to jail, but I was finally convicted of some misdemeanors for my drug use and drug theft. All that was left was death. And what I knew, the only thing I knew, was that I didn't want to die. I did want to live. Why? I didn't really know. My 2 children, and again, I just felt such a failure to them. But I can remember even with my own father, as much as he failed, I wanted him to love me, and I wanted to love him. That never really went away. And I felt like they were spared most of it, until the very end. But they always just wanted their dad. And that was just such an incredible feeling, that after all that I'd done, that they were still there for me. And they still wanted to be in my life. So I couldn't check out for them. I couldn't. And that's where it started. And I can remember after the COVID fog, and after I was able to start working as a nurse again, and some of the immediate concerns of my life disappeared, that's when I realized that it's just me and my story. So I started to write. I started to write for real this time. And that creative, that boy deep down inside me, when I finally pulled the gag off of me, had a lot to say. In fact, the first words that I wrote down, which were pretty much the keystone of this book, of course, I cannot identify these primal emotions at the time. They were dug out of me and dissected years later during my drug and alcohol rehab tour. Trauma, my counselors called it. The first time I heard the word trauma, or at least understood what it meant, I was studying to be a registered nurse. In that context, trauma glowed a red, pretentious monolith on the brick facades of hospitals, or spelled backward in the front of an ambulance, so when it is wailing in your rearview mirror, there's no doubt who has the right of way. Trauma is always the color of blood. It's always the sound of, oh fuck. During my clinical rotations in emergency rooms, Trauma was preceded by terms like blunt force, thermal, and firearm. Bilateral axial loading in trauma is what happens when you dive headfirst into a shallow pool. Trauma is getting your face caved in during a high-speed car collision. It is losing fingers when disemboweling a snowblower. Trauma is getting bounced around a steel box with the violent energy of a derailing train. Trauma is guts and gore and exposed bone. Clearly, stilling myself to walk into a bar at the age of 13 to find my dad, who I was beginning to think may be dead. I was not experiencing trauma. All I knew was that my heart was pounding the way it was when I was tearing through the water during a swim meet. My chest was tight, and I worked to breathe the way I would when allergy-induced asthma attacked my lungs. In that moment, my shadow sliding up the rotting door of what may as well have been a mausoleum. I had no idea why. Those words, they poured out of me. Just like that. I'm doing it old school, scratching it down on paper. And I thought, wow. There it was, there were those goosebumps. I was sitting there crying over the page, the tears dropping onto the ink, blurring everything up. And that's when I said, I can do this, I have to do this. This has to happen. At that point, the book itself wasn't even really a thing in my mind. It was just, this has to get out somehow. Another thing, we're taught into recovery, that's why we go to meetings, we talk, right? You have the most impartial jury you're ever gonna meet in that room. They're gonna listen, they're gonna nod. They don't have to say anything, they just let you dump. And I call this used not a memoir, because it's not. It's a memory dump. I couldn't keep it in here anymore. My past, my future, that present that I never wanted to be in, I had to put it somewhere. That's why this book exists. All of the acronyms that I created, when I finally got serious about writing the book, I enlisted the help of an author coach. That was his idea. He said there was always a method to the madness, so I supplied the madness. He helped me supply the method. And it was a good way to frame things, and really got me thinking, like, what are my precepts for life? And it was a joy to kind of come up with those, the input from others, and help me come up with those. And I feel like it's a pretty good cheat code, for how we do things. Of course, being fantasy fiction being my first love, I couldn't resist the urge to at least infuse some of that into the book. Because I certainly wanted to put my children in the book in some way, even though they were sort of passengers for this whole ride. They didn't really see the length and the breadth of it. But what better way to kind of honor the two fantasies of my life than putting them in a fantastical situation. Adam grins as the spinning fury from the twin Fragnarok cannons pulses down his arms. It almost tickles, like trying to withstand the shock from that old arcade game where you grip two furiously vibrating silver handles for as long as you could. Befitting its apocalyptic moniker, the titular Fragnarok is a prototype Gatling railgun sporting 6 sets of electromagnetic propulsion-powered ultanium rounds on oscillating rotors, capable of delivering depleted uranium slugs at 4,000 rotations per minute, with a top speed of 3 kilometers per second. Adam has 2 of these shredding a towering horror show before him, a massive, shambling murder machine, and all it's doing is pissing it off. A battered exoskeleton, nothing more than a mess of neosteel beams and pistons molded to roughly accommodate the average human body and welded together, offers Adams as much protection as a mesh condom. Acting as little more than a scaffold for the guns that the eggheads back in R&D postulate will hold together, Adam plods along in his suicide suit, to which he cynically refers to the shell, with surprising grace along the war-torn planet, adjusting his angles of fire on the monstrosity, a tower-sized tango. Guts, gore, and amalgamated chunks of biomechanical debris woven into the beast rain down around Adam, torn off by the merciless salvo from the Fragnarok. Cleo, his commanding officer and older sister, slides across the Vicario Viz display. Dumbass, you're just wasting ammo. Do what I told you to do. Her beautiful, fierce brown eyes mirrored Adam's own. I got this. Stick to your paintings, referring to Cleo's pretentious yet accurate artistic battle plans. Cleo sticks out her tongue and tussles the hollow display of Adam's exosuit as she would his video game controllers as children. Cut it out, Adam pleads. The affliction, they call it. A nightmare creature cobbled together from years of unbridled consumption. But people, things, ideas, from brilliant to horrifying, dreams and delusions, it absorbs and infects all it touches. Adam doesn't care what it is, only what it was. But he knows it must die. Contained on this husk of a world that has bled dry, it might exist for eternity in its own blight, honoring and harming only itself, but what came before it, what may still be a part of it, Adam is here to salvage at any cost. And of course, my children go on to obliterate the monstrosity that is me and unearth the man from within. And I thought it was a brilliant tribute to them. And like I said, also helped me scratch that itch, trying to put in some kind of original sci-fi story, in another favorite genre, so I snuck that in there. But the premise of the book is really just honesty. The book is everything that I am. It's written with anger. It's written with joy, with hope, with love, cynicism, all the things that I am. It's a selfish book. It's me just pouring my pain out on the pages. So for those reading that, that visceral impact, that's what I wanted to go for. When I think of the biggest influences I had as writers in my own work, two come to mind. The first is David Mitchell. He wrote books like Ghostwritten, Cloud Atlas. He was a master at writing anthologies and having so many different characters that he could, that could be all books on their own. Yet this guy could leap from one to the next effortlessly, and it was just incredible. And while this book is not obviously an anthology, I do feel like there are parts like that, and I really wanted to structure it that way. There's Chuck Palahniuk, who's written probably over a dozen books by now since the early 90s. He's best known for Fight Club. And he kind of has this minimalist, dark, natural style of writing. Infuses kind of philosophical ideas, talking about these really deep concepts, like death, in unusual ways, avoidance of cliches, all things I really tried to do with the book, to kind of try and make it my own. And it took shape. I probably spent the better part of a year writing the guts of it. And it just took a long time to really kind of refine. There was a few times where I just stopped. We get to the point where it just was too painful to relive a lot of these things. It literally starts from the time I was a child all the way up to probably about a month before it was published, through my daughter's high school graduation. And when I finally got done it, I remember sitting there at the laptop just like, wow, it's done. I had an author coach who, like I said, the one who really helped me kind of keep things structured. And thankfully for him, every 2 weeks we'd have a check-in call. And he would say, how we feeling? How we doing? Are we writing? And if I was having a hard time, he'd help me find a way to get through it. This book really couldn't have been written without literally a village of people. My own fiance, Nicole, sitting in the audience. She was my biggest cheerleader, my biggest woo girl, trying to get this thing done. She even set up a writer's retreat for me in the Poconos. It was just me, Nicole, and the writing. I got, I think, 2 whole chapters written that week. But the hardest thing was really trying to go back through it, to edit it. I had a professional editor help me out with things, and he's like, wow. It's like, what was that like to write? I said, it was not easy. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that it, because I know for me, I was scared straight. At the end of the day, it's absolutely what happened. I've been scared straight before, but this time I knew that the only thing left was the end. I wasn't ready for that. I have a cousin, matter of fact. I lived with him shortly after my divorce, and we were both in early recovery. When he relapsed while I was living with him, and I wound up moving out, and he's had a hard road. Matter of fact, he's getting out of rehab again this Tuesday. And you know, I'm not sure what to do for him. You know, he's read this book. We've lived a lot of it together. I write about him in the book, and all I can do for him is hope and pray at this point. But you know, he is who I wrote this book for. You know, I didn't really have any grand aspirations, retiring on the proceeds or anything like that. In fact, it was launched the week that Prince Harry's book came out. Probably why you didn't hear about this. Only one ginger on the bestsellers list at a time. But that's okay. Not long ago, I had a friend of a friend wanted to copy the book to give to her son-in-law. And apparently he was struggling with drinking. It was damaging his family, his home life. He was in sales, so kind of taking clients out, schmoozing them was a big part of the job. But it was really affecting him in his entire life in negative ways. And he was about to go on another big business trip, and his wife gave him this book. And when we finally got together after the trip, he shook my hand, he told me, he said, "Your book stopped me from drinking." I mean, whatever aspirations I had for this book, I mean, that exceeded all of them. And for me, I mean, like I said, relapse is never far away. But, and I feel like the best way to attack it is head on. And I'll read one more thing. I put this toward the end. It's probably the hardest thing I had to write. But it's what gave me the lasting impression of what addiction was like. 3 days later, it was Thanksgiving, and I was sitting in my cousin's bedroom, the place he graciously let me make my home, with his gun pressed to my head. It was a steel beauty, a 9mm Glock 34, which, at this range, could fire a bullet in one side of my head and out the other. I pulled back on the slide and let it snap back into place. I imagined the bold-faced onomatopoeia of a comic book sound effect. Cha-chack. I pulled the trigger. Click. The clip loaded with jacketed hollow points sat on the bed next to me. Billy only had range rounds meant for ease of use with low recoil while practice firing. Because these bullets do not expand or fragment on impact, I have seen people survive one to the head. I cannot take that chance. Went out and got a box of the real things. When we glimpse the end of something, we tend to think about its beginning. I glimpsed so many ends and contemplated so many beginnings. I no longer care what all started, only when it will all end. I was going to end it that night. Billy and I ate dinner with our extended family at our aunt and uncle's home. Billy wrote a very touching poem to his parents. The paper he wrote it on trembled as he read from it. Cleo and Adam were with Cece and her family. Despite all I should be thankful for, I still focused on all I had lost. No, I did not lose anything. I gave it all away. That realization did not make it any more palatable. Check. Click. The pulpy graphic novel sound of the cold steel reminded me of another beginning, one I also hoped would be the last. Just a few months ago, still at Avenues, my discharge was imminent. I got a going away present in the form of a sobriety shock tech. I'm sitting in a circle of people I've come to care for very much in one of those office chairs with wheels and a lever that brings you up and down. Katie struggles to get her eyes, shrink-wrapped in tears, to meet mine. She squirms in her seat, crimping her mouth tight, looking anywhere but at me. She lets out a frustrated sigh. She isn't frustrated with me, I don't think, but with what she was just asked to say to me. Finally, her ocean blue irises wash over me, soft with pity. "You are a lying, self-centered bastard," she says, shaking her head. A tear breaks loose. Her face melts with apology. I turn my hair a chair to the left and face Sebastian, another housemate. The hydraulics click through the chair shaft. Cha-chack, click. Never want to shy away from the bare-knuckle truth. Evenly, he says, "You never loved us." Another turn of the office chair, another cha-chack, another click. I stop at Greg. He rubs the stubble on his cheek, then drops his hand on his lap. His sunbeam bread boy face betrays a violent criminal past. I love him like a brother. He flashes the conciliatory smile full of chiclet teeth and says, "You abandon us." Another turn, another cha-chack click. just like the gun I keep cocking and putting against my head. Now Angela, a deer in headlights, says, "You're a bad father." I hear the words, but it's like they're aimed at someone else. Cha-chack, click. Jen says, "You've ruined every good thing you've ever had." Cha-chack, click. "You can't be in a loving relationship." Click. Dylan is face down, peers up at me. "You always come first." I keep turning. Cha-chack, click. "You're reckless." Click. "You drove drunk with your kids." Click. "Something's off." Click. "You just couldn't get it done." Click. "You'll never be present." Click. "You chose this." Click. "You'll always be alone." Click. "I hope it was worth it." Click. "You don't want to be sober." Cha-chack, click. Boom. Torture, isn't it? Hush puppies pressing to the microfiber carpet. As a man saunters outside the circle of shame, John Shepherd, the celebrant in this church of chastising, head counselor of Avenues Recovery Center, delivers the message of his existential experiment. To hear that committee in your head all the time, he continues, one of his lanky arms straight by his side, the other bent up, his thumb pressed against his first two fingers. To let it tell you who you are, pure torture. It's not real, but we spend all our lives listening to it. So it's the only truth we know. Intense and affable, John scans the circle, then looks straight at me. He brings out the best in those who indulge the worst in themselves, not always gently. Now everyone look at him and keep repeating what you just said. My brothers and sisters in recovery, my reluctant jury, look at each other and me with dread. Come on, speak up, John urges. The accusations resume. My sins, scattered in the intonations of my friends, blend into a listless undertone. Louder, John tongue lashes the circle. The voices are staggered like the beginning of a hymn no one knows, but I can hear my truth again. I turn and click around the circle to look at my friends. No one is looking back. Louder, faces turn to John in frustration. Voices crack the way they do when throats are yanked by the collar. I look at Katie, tears streaming down her face. I choke back my own. Greg is looking right at me, bless his melting heart and face. Even Sebastian seems sorry. The cacophony of scorn continues because it must. I need to hear it. I need to feel it. We all do. My tears are for them as much as myself. Will this feeling, this catalog of all my sins spoken, change me? Can I channel this pain when I am weak? I was never weak. I just didn't want to. Stop, yells Jean. The chorus is replaced by sniffling and shuddered breaths. That's what a syringe full of heroin does. John scans every eye, dry and wet. That's what a fifth of vodka does. That's what a line of coke does. It makes it stop. All the pain, the doubt, the fear, all the shit we let ourselves believe, gone. And nothing, not a family, a job, or fear of a cell can compete with that. So, that's what we're up against. That's why I did this. If somebody can read this, just get a different perspective, something they haven't seen before, that can keep them from a fate like that, then I win. That's worth than any book profits I could ever hope for. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Let me kind of drone on, and probably the most self-serving thing I've ever done. And again, thank you for those who invested in the book, your time, your money, if you bought it. To Mark Pinto, bringing my book into your Howard Halls. Thank you, what an honor. And of course to Ms. Mahan. Wherever you are, I'm sure working, being an amazing teacher at a Catholic school, you're way right there, you belong. Thank you for giving me a purpose. So I wanted to spend some time to just kind of hear from you. If you have anything you want to say, did you like it, did you hate it, questions about anything I said, please give me your criticisms, give me your critique. The floor is yours.
I have some questions.
Yes, of course.
So you had said earlier when you were sharing one of your chapters out of your book, you said he was not my father. Can you share a little deeper? What did you mean by that? He wasn't your father biologically, or he wasn't your father, you didn't have a relationship with him and you no longer knew him?
So, who I speak about in the book is my father, my biological father. And I think what I was trying to get to was the fact that, losing him as a father at a young age, at 13, even though he lived for another 17 years, we just weren't in each other's lives. After that moment when I went to the bar to find him, and he didn't want to leave, that was kind of it, as far as I was concerned, as far as that father-son relationship it was just done at that point. So what had started to happen after that, I started to kind of dig this shame hole for myself. And without even realizing it, I had uncles, I had a godfather, I had many men in my life that wanted to be that father figure for me, and I kept them at arm's length. And I feel like even today, there's men might only even have a few years on me, but seem to kind of have their stuff together and they're very confident in who they are. And, it's like I want to be around these men, but I feel like I don't want to say something to sound dumb, and kind of betray my air of being this stable human being. It's almost like I'm afraid to be too near them, just because I feel like, losing my father when I did, it was like this complex interaction where, I don't want you moving in on him. He's still around, But even after he was gone, it was just kind of hard for me to relate to men like that, because I feel like they'll look at me and I might present well, but I felt for a long time, I felt like I wasn't, just that shame hole. I feel like now, as I've been sober for an extended period of time, like I'm the father I'm supposed to be. I'm the professional I'm supposed to be, the man I'm supposed to be. So I feel like I've finally filled those shoes to a degree. But it all started when I was younger, and just really sort of keeping those would-be suitors, those would-be father figures, sort of out of my life. So that's what I was trying to get to with that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also you said that you're divorced. How long have you been divorced now?
6 years.
And how many kids do you have?
2.
So do you have a relationship with them?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah. I mean, at first it was tough. They were young. I mean, they were 21 and 17 now, so minus 6. And they had been, dealing with this for the better part of most of their lives. My daughter was born, my first 3 years into recovery, and I wound up having relapse a few years after that. My son was born a few years after that, so they saw me at my worst multiple times. But I feel like now they certainly relate to me in ways that they can't relate to their mother, and vice versa. So we still both serve an important part in their lives. And I have a decent relationship with their mother as well. So, and I think that's really for them. We don't want to show them that doing this. I mean, obviously we're trying to show them what it's like to have healthy relationships and to deal with adversity and things like that. And like I said, my daughter's in college. My son's a senior in high school, and they're doing what kids their age are supposed to be doing. And they're in a good place.
That's good. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. That's very powerful. So I never did a drug or drank a day in my life, but I've always taken to people who's in tough places.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had went up to a person who spoke about being sober and homeless and going through some things, and I said, so can I ask you something, with me being someone who's never did drugs, can I help somebody who's an addict? And he said, yes, Mercedes, an addict doesn't care what you did, where you're from, they just care if someone cares. And I was like,
That's a
thank you
good
so
way to
much
say
for
it.
that confirmation. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. A lot of us have been to hell and back. We've seen the worst things you can get. If someone's willing to listen, we'll talk to you for sure. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'll say something.
Yes.
Well, you brought me to tears for one. Also, thank you for sharing. And I think there's many addictions. I mean, I have probably food and shopping, not even diagnosed per se, but just, so it was very powerful for me. And I don't know if you can buy the book, or I saw a list over there or whatever.
I have a couple of copies here tonight, which I'm willing to give whoever wants one. And then we were going to take, if you guys want a copy, it's going to take names, addresses, and we'll get one shipped out to you. I normally have
Okay.
a bunch with me to give away, but
Yeah.
please, you can take one of the copies here tonight.
Well, that would be wonderful.
But yeah, like I said before, everybody's got their something, you know. And I feel like now, like I work out almost every day, and I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't, like, kind of switched addictions to this.
Right, sure, and I would imagine that may happen.
It's a little bit
Yeah.
less destructive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had to do it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
if I
And
miss it-
shopping.
Okay.
It's Christmas time. It's Christmas time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's, you know, addiction has such a stigma,
yeah.
you know, and it's mostly drugs, it's alcohol, you know, food addictions, things like that.
And one thing I was thinking when you were talking about your kids being in college and stuff and what they could be exposed to, and with having you be in that position, are they, like, how do they handle that, or do they drink themselves, or do you hang out with family or friends that do?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
do, and
Yeah.
it's really, as long as I'm there with, you know, obviously I'm there with my family. The biggest thing is, you know, everybody knows about me now, because it used to be, it was that hidden thing that no one knew about. Or everybody knows about it, I got nowhere to hide it, you know, so it loses its power. But yeah, no, I can absolutely go to a family gathering, you know, where alcohol's, as a matter of fact, we go to the boardroom in Phoenixville and eat at the bar, you know.
I've never seen you there, I live across the street.
Oh, is that right?
And I'm there literally every day, and I was here before.
Well, you can follow us after this.
I was there before this, I had my bucket shot oysters.
But I feel like we were actually just away in Mexico for a week, and we were in the resort, and you know, besides, you know, if you're not if you don't play golf or you don't exercise, and I was exercising every day, not a whole lot to do there but eat and drink, you know, so I ate plenty. But you know, after like 2 or 3 days of it, I'm like, okay, why don't you guys go and I'll just kind of hang out someplace else, because you know, being around it too often is just, it's not so much like, there's not really like a danger there, it's more of just like, this is not a part of me anymore, you know, it's not something I want to be around.
Yeah.
But, you know, as opposed to my cousin who, you know, I feel like he can't be around any of it, because I feel like
Yeah.
every time he does, he goes right back down that dark path again. The key is just time. The more time you can put through yourself and your vice, you know, the better if you're going to do. I felt like he was never giving himself enough time. But I feel like, yeah, so obviously a huge stigma still against addiction. Matter of fact, once a month I go to a local hospital and speak to new hires, you know, nurses, techs, doctors, on the dangers of addiction. And they might be dealing with people in active recovery, active addiction, or in recovery even in their practice. And it's just sort of, you know, kind of how to handle that. You know, but also in themselves. 1 in 6 healthcare workers, you know, of any role, is in some phase of addiction. You know, about 15 to 20% people. And you know, I've had my struggles as a healthcare professional, but I've seen a lot of others. You know, and you often don't know how to very well. We're experts at compartmentalizing. You know, we're programmed to sort of not really express emotion over the terrible things we see. You know, a lot of stuff gets bottled up, and like I was saying before, it needs to come out somehow. You don't do it the right way, and then it comes out in the wrong way. So, yeah, you're not gonna get any judgment from me. You know, if you have shopping addiction or anything like that, just let's talk. You know, that's all.
But with
The
your
shine
kids
behind
and
the,
their,
keep going.
oh no, I was just
No,
thinking
after
with the
you.
kids part, I didn't mean to interrupt you
No,
on
it's
what you
quite
just
okay.
said.
Oh, but yeah, I never got to that. My,
Like how they deal, I was just wondering.
well, it's the
how
kind
it
of thing
comes
where
from.
they know they actually have not read the book, and they've been going through so many things in their life with school and very important times, and you know, sort of, you know, these very important events. And I just didn't want to kind of distract them from anything. That there's stuff in here they don't know. But when the time's right, I'll dedicate one to each of them. You know, give it. They could read it. They could not read it. I'll leave it to them. I know my daughter. She's 21 years old. To my knowledge, has never had a drink. I mean, she may have in high school, but her mother took her to a trip in Ireland for her senior graduation as a present, and she was even legally able to drink there, not a drop. You know, she's very introverted. She's an artist, very, very eclectic, and very eccentric, and a lot of her friends are the same exact way. And I know that she says that some of her friends do drink, they smoke marijuana. It's just not something she ever wanted to be a part of. You know, whether that's because of me, I don't know, she's never said that. You know, whereas my son is much more the typical teenage boy, you know. He has drank, I know marijuana is something that he uses fairly regularly. You know, but I've had that talk with them. I said, listen, there's nothing you can say to me that's gonna upset me or shock me. I'd rather know ahead of time before it becomes a real issue. You know, and all I can say is if you think you're having an issue, you gotta talk to me about it. If I see something, I'm gonna tell you about it. So, but I feel like I couldn't be that for them, you know, if I wasn't where I am today. You know, I would never recommend anybody follow the path I did to get where I am, to write this book. But it's the path I had to walk, you know. And often a lot of us have to do that. Hopefully you get there before that third rung, you know, before it kills you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The motivation behind the author name, because as you talk about in your readings, as it being a memory dump for you and being a personal memoir, there's going to be countless amount of hope that is provided via what we're talking about in your memoir. And I don't know if that hope can be, well, I don't know if the hope can be attributed to an author name versus a nameless, you know, I have 19 years active in recovery, and when I hear these things, losing my mom to a fentanyl overdose and having a heroin addiction at 18, hearing and very well versed in hearing some of the stuff that some normals might feel as pain, it's relatable, but there's the hope in there.
Yeah.
And I was curious where the stigma for the author, is it only professionally, is it personal?
Both.
Both?
When I set out to write this and knew that there was no turning back, I even spoke to one of the managers at where I work as a professional, my day job. And I said, I want to do this. What kind of repercussions am I looking at? Because there's a lot, yeah, of course, all the names are changed for individuals, for people I dealt with. I don't mention any place I worked as a nurse. But it's all in there, you know. So if my name as a medical professional is on that cover,
All right.
and there's somebody I take care of under anesthesia, I mean, if somebody wanted to make a stink, they certainly could. You know, and if one thing hospitals want or don't want, it's a lawsuit. So at the end of the day, I never got a clear answer on could I or couldn't I. So
They don't want to roll the dice.
no.
And now what about medically? So I'm very active, like boots on the ground, the opposite of, but you work in the medical portion, so there's also a stigma of uneducated medical professionals on what the disease is actually about. So I heard you talking about starting some programs inside of an old workspace or new workspace, and I applaud you for that, because I
Thank you.
believe that's what's going to help shake some of the stigma, and being, you know, one for others would be the goal in starting programs like that at your workplace.
Well, and it's, you know, I speak with a lot of intelligent people, you know, nurses, doctors. Yeah, and it's maybe it shouldn't be, but it is surprising to me how little they really know. And, you know, the methods that they cling to, you know, which just don't work. And I think that even people I work with, there's a handful of people that, you know, that are in my close circle that kind of know about me and what I've put myself through. And I'm always happy to talk about that stuff to them, because there's a few of them that where it's like, as soon as they hear about that, they sort of come out with some struggles they've had. And, you know, of course it's a cone of silence, but, you know, and it was such an honor for them to come to me with that, because I feel like that there is like this intimate level of trust there, you know, and I feel that is a reason that's one very important thing that keeps me on the level, you know, that you can kind of inspire trust like that in someone, you know, which I have. But there's some other people that, and, you know, they talk about all the drinking they did over the weekend, and they're like, yeah, I got some drug addict, you know, patient in here, and what a scumbag. And it's like, so that talk's always going to be out there, you know, and it's certainly not something I take personally, I mean, because I'm so used to it. Have been, you know, since I've been in this field. I mean, medicine, yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, you know, I mean, not even for the things we see and encounter people you work with. It's very strong personalities, you know, a lot of holier than thou, you know, type things going on, and you know, it is what it is. But you have some genius level people working in this field and doing some amazing things. But there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to addiction, still, for sure. So yeah, anything I can do to chip away at that.
Yes, sir.
That's why I'm
That's the
doing it.
hit.
Yeah.
And that's what I called you for.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate that, Todd. Well, I guess that's time.
Two questions.
Yes, of course.
Number one, where can people watching this video get your book? And two, might there be a next chapter to your writing career?
Huh. That's the question, isn't it? First question's easy enough. It is available on Amazon in book form and also via Kindle. As a matter of fact, I just recorded an audio version, and again, starting things but not finishing them. I had a good friend help me out with a website. I want to get that up and running. And I think as far as a next chapter in this, I just want to kind of keep the story going, you know, in through that avenue. So, you know, I'll certainly pass the information along when that's live, and you can kind of hear me talking about all these hopeful and horrible things. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I finally was able to kind of remove that gag to get the writer's voice out there. And yeah, I absolutely want to continue with it. So it's really just a matter of kind of which path I take. But,
Sounds like there's several paths you can go.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing tonight. Thank you for being here.